council schedule to allow for that. And then eventually an adoption. So. The survey timing is probably going to be one where it's going to be more instructive to the work to be done, as opposed to the SDT wrapping up its goals and discussion with Julie Ornay, and given the timing of the team that she has over there, we're in the process of taking right now, which was the completed set of strategies, and moving them into actual questions. But given the amount of work there is to create the instrument and get that out there, get the feedback and compile it, that probably is not going to be in until October. So it'll be not necessarily that instructive to the final set of recommendations from this group, but I think what it will do is it'll allow us to ask questions of the public, which will set the expectation and foundation for where we are on exploration of the specific strategies that you've come up with. We're going to ask them questions that really get at some of their interest level and openness to certain strategies that would involve action on their part too. So whether it's energy building performance disclosures, on selling a property, or willingness to convert natural gas uses to electric. These are all various strategies that are in the draft document that you have, and so those will be elements within the survey instrument, and will be important, I think, to help us understand where people's minds are right now. And we'll also ask some questions about their level of awareness as it relates to where they have access to education. So if they want to get started, do they feel like they have a high level of awareness on where to actually find the information they need to get started? If not, we'll know that, but also ask some specific questions about where they go to get that information. So it helps us understand kind of where people are, what they're using right now to help them, in their journey. So. Yeah. Yep. I'd have to ask Ann, maybe you know that, the pamphlet that goes out to everybody.
Oh, yes.
Does a PDF go along with that bill?
No, I think any of the e-bills don't get whatever the inserts are.
I thought they did for some reason, but I'd have to double check.
Yeah,
We can
double check,
verify
'cause I
one
don't
way or
know
the other,
for
but
sure.
yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that's been an annual thing that we've done, so, yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Hey.
good afternoon.
Hi.
You see that, you heard the time constraints we're on for a forum?
Yeah, I thought it'd be a good day to show up late.
That helps start things off, right?
Okay, Fred.
Would you like a roll call?
Yeah, roll call sounds good.
All right, sounds good. Feltman?
Present.
Thompson? Hemingway?
Here.
Williams? Pajot?
Here.
Aaronshorst?
Here.
Corbin? Christians?
Here.
We have 5. We have a quorum.
Scott's out today.
I haven't heard, so
Okay.
hopefully he'll show up. If he does, then that will allow us to continue after
All right.
Boyd has to leave.
Yeah, I know Travis is in Alaska and PJ had to get out on work last minute, so. Okay, well, we'll jump right in. We need a motion to approve the meeting minutes from last time.
So moved. Second.
Thanks, Boyd and Tim. Any discussion or commentary on the minutes? All in favor of passing the minutes as written? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thanks. Public comment? Alrighty. So, we need to receive the online public comments. Do we motion to approve those in,
Yeah.
them in
Mhm.
first?
Yeah.
Let's do that. I think that's what we do, is we move to approve them to be included, and then we talk about them. So,
So move.
thanks, Tim.
Support.
Thanks, Nikki. Any commentary on them?
I thought Laura Judge's note and some of the recommendations around the accountability reporting that we've recommended was very useful. Something that could be pulled off the shelf in the future.
Yeah, I'm not it was very detailed and robust. I wasn't exactly sure how much of that was easily accessible or not,
Right.
but it was certainly a detailed list.
Yeah, certainly as we get into accountability, that could be used as a resource.
Yeah, I had a little comment on all the stuff coming to council. And I'm trying to pull it up here.
Can that get pulled up on the screens for us?
It's all the same language, and
Yeah, they had a common theme.
Oh, the 20? The 20.
Yeah, the
identical
20
ones,
comments.
Yeah. Did those go to council?
I think they're all to council mostly. Maybe not.
I think they just went to public comment.
Here we go. Okay, so.
I just wanted to see some of the particular comments that were more related to there's a standard form letter that was put out relative to,
I'm pulling something up here so I can be accurate.
series of decisions on the way over here. Did you? Traffic lights.
All right. So these letters, here we go, great. So these letters all pretty much say the same stuff, which is
Yeah.
asking for council to include the science-based goal of carbon neutrality by 2050. And so addressing the overarching goal, which, as we've talked about, is not inside of the confines of the SDT's decision-making hierarchy. And these are all, I believe, to council, or maybe they're to SDT?
Yeah,
Is it to us or to council?
I think it's SDT.
Is it to us?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that any, Rick's gonna yell at me?
It says city council, go ahead.
I think it depends.
It depends, maybe a mix?
And
Okay.
we ask that anything sent to city council gets sent to us too,
Yeah.
just so we would all,
That's for our benefit.
Yeah.
But I'm just trying to point out that it wasn't addressed on all cases to the SDT.
correct.
Yeah. So this is interesting, this language, and I think people have heard me talk about this before around my hesitation around this stuff is because these words don't mean the same things to everybody. And I was listening to a podcast the other day. And I'll send this to whoever, and it ends up in the notes so everybody can listen to it. But the podcast is called The Interchange, and it's all about energy. And on August 13th, there was an interview with a guy who's got a tech startup all around carbon accounting. And the title of this podcast is called The Big Moment for Carbon Accounting. And this is, and so these are, and you'll listen to it and you'll experience it, but I think that that'll be helpful at the heart of my hesitation around taking this kind of language under strong consideration right now, is because these two people that are like, all they do is talk about energy and they talk about global carbon and all of the very progressive, like they're talking about the ICCP report and all of the most progressive stuff. They were literally talking about how people don't have agreement on what all of these terms mean. And this is not like random people in Holland, Michigan. These are like people who host a very famous podcast around energy globally that are talking about the lack of defined detail around carbon, around these terms. And in particular, in this episode, you'll hear they talk about how about the phrase carbon neutrality is actually not it's what businesses are actually shifting away from, because carbon neutrality is you can offset, you can buy your way to being neutral. And how these guys, the whole discussion was around that's not going to actually help climate change. That doesn't actually get us there. What the ICCP report is recommending is people need to reduce, which is science-based targets mostly, and then sequester carbon, not just like pay to avoid creating more carbon. Anyways, it's a really good conversation. It's 45 minutes long. And to me, what was useful relative to our conversation here and all these commentary is what the Climate Collaborative folks here are recommending we use is language that people who are on the bleeding edge of this stuff today are saying is not even the right way to be thinking about it. And that's under the guise of we're not even all thinking of the same thing when we're using these words. And so anyways, I just encourage everybody to listen to that podcast, because to me, it just was validating around like, I'm happy to be outvoted, but I'm not inclined to include language around 2050 in this for a variety of reasons, and most of them being like that people don't know what these terms even mean. And so we can do all this good work and, define those words down the road when we all have a better understanding of what they all mean. Mm-hmm. So anyways, that's just, these letters came through and I just listened to that podcast the other day and I was like, this is exactly why I think we shouldn't put it in, because the most progressive people in the world don't even agree on what all this stuff means. So anyways.
So words matter.
Well.
And if we can't agree, then we're just doing it to make it sound good, like we're doing something for the climate change.
Well, I think that we are all doing this for a variety of reasons, and climate change is one of those reasons. But I think the interesting thing was we're being recommended from the Climate Collaborative, which I believe is pretty heavily motivated by climate change, to have a goal of carbon neutrality. And this podcast, these people were talking about how that's not even the appropriate that's not even the appropriate goal. Like that's like offsetting and buying your way there. It actually won't do it. So I guess that's what I'm lifting up, is it's like this under the guise of climate science, according to these people, wouldn't even be a good enough goal.
It's making me think under the projected results. I love what you're saying, and I still like the sentence that we put in that says, and provide the opportunity to achieve further significant reductions by 2050. I'm just wondering then, if we did have something short, a sentence or two that calls out that this is action-based, we don't have carbon offset purchasing in the math. Maybe that is an appropriate summary. Still to call that out, that these are action-based, creates a foundation for future significant reductions, and does not account for, the purchase of offsets, even though it is a lever for us to explore.
Yeah, I'm fine with,
because it's such a hot topic, to call out what our strategy is. It's an action-based strategy that at this moment excludes the purchase of offsets in our calculations that we've done to achieve these targets.
I'm fine with
Something.
Yeah, no, I think I'm good with what we have right now. I'm just sort of reacting to these recommendations around we should name carbon neutrality by 2050 as a new big goal. Yeah. And what was interesting was like these people were like, that's not even going to get, that isn't,
No.
One, people don't agree on what this stuff means, and two, under these definitions, carbon neutrality is not enough.
Right.
So
But their big point is it's action-based reduction, you know, that isn't just purchasing.
Yeah, and
Or maybe it's how you present it to council.
and they were really lifting up like reduction and efficiency is like the basis of any real meaningful plan around climate change. And then their point was sequestration. I don't want to regurgitate the entire podcast.
No.
We should all listen to it. It was just an interesting confluence of things where this language and that podcast were
So you-
coming into my purview at the exact same time. So I just thought I would talk about it
Still
here.
feels worth, maybe it's when you present it, how you present it is, maybe that goes on record to council and how you capture that thought of why this is the way it is.
Yeah, and why we're not explicitly addressing the 2050 goal.
Yeah.
But that all the work that we're doing is hugely, I mean, we're moving the 2050 goal up 20
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
But, you know,
It
anyways.
isn't that we haven't thought of or
Right.
we've dismissed this goal.
Yeah.
I think you're reacting partly to the number of letters that are all identical. Because usually we take these letters and we like the comments and we appreciate the comments. And we encourage comments, but these were many, all very similar in nature.
It was a form letter.
Yeah, Jeff.
So I think my personal, we should have some more careful consideration of the big goal before deciding to change it. So maybe this is something that we highlight as this has to be decided on the next time the SDT meets, whether it's an SDT thing or a council thing or some combination, but we recommend the final goal has to change and we have to put some more thought into what that actually should be and what the words should be around that, and that should happen sooner rather than later. Whether it has a specific year tied to it or it doesn't, or what it should look like. Because I think you're right. If your final goal, the way that you're going to meet it is we're going to stay at 11.5 megatons per capita and we're going to offset our way to zero, that's not really a feasible path for doing that. So maybe it's something that we should just lift up more specifically as this is something that we really need to, because we haven't talked at all in like any of the learning sessions, any of that, about what the goal should be, right? We maybe all have our own knowledge and opinions, but that hasn't been a shared learning experience.
I would really resonate with that. And I think what you would, in your 45 minutes of listening to this podcast, if you find the time, what you'll hear is an open discussion around people reacting off of the latest report and then talking about what it will actually take. And so this is such a live wire conversation, my point being that I don't think it's something that we are lifting up as for council to like I don't feel like we should have a strong recommendation on what the 2050 goal should be, but I love like it's certainly based on all the updated ICCP report and all of that kind of stuff. It needs to be looked at and considered in short order. I'm very comfortable with something like that where we're alluding to needs to be paid attention to, but we're not commenting on it in this.
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, we have a goal set up for 2030, which is long enough term that whatever we decide for 2040, 2050, our actions from now till 2030, like we got those, I think we're on the right path. Yeah. So then we have to figure out eventually, like, where do we go from there? So I would think that, if we're talking the next SDT is 2023, 24, 25, I don't know, somewhere in there, then that we maybe have more definition on what that goal should be, and that's a time that we should really be figuring out what that is. So that would be my personal recommendation.
Okay. Great. Yeah, these comments came through, so I wanted to lift that up. And I'll make sure that the link to that podcast is circulated in a public way, somehow, some way, for everybody to hear what I heard. Not saying that they're, exactly right, but it was just an interesting, the language So, great. Any other comments on that? Otherwise, we can acknowledge these as part of the written record of the meeting.
Did we vote on it?
Yeah, all in favor of including them is in the meeting?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay. Thanks. And that was, I believe, Tim and Nikki, first and second there. All righty, moving right along. We have the draft report. I'm wondering out loud if we would like to hear from, like, actually skip this and go to 5 and hear from Joe before Boyd leaves.
That's a good
Well,
idea.
there's one thing I want to make sure that you do hear under number 4, as it's pertinent to the targets.
Yeah.
And just so you're aware, and I don't think we need to make this too long, but I asked Andrew Reynolds to be here today. I think, as you know, you met Andrew in the past. He is our Community Energy Services Manager. Upon Ann's pending retirement coming up, Ann has moved into a supporting role over next series of months here, and Andrew has assumed the position. So congratulations to Andrew on that. But also, Andrew has been instrumental in putting together the actual calculations from the last few years. One piece of information has to do with the transportation piece. There are sources of data that come into that, and some of those sources of data are changing. So just so you understand the ramifications of that for the 2020 number, I've asked Andrew to just give a brief summary of that real quick. So Andrew, if you could maybe do that. Thank you.
Sounds great. Welcome, Andrew.
Yeah, just to build off what Dave said. So we're lucky that with our carbon calculations for the city, we have a lot of local data that's obviously very specific to us, but unfortunately the transportation data is not as specific to the city of Holland. So over the last couple of years, we've attempted to calculate that piece of the pie. We've had to rely on MDOT to give us what our vehicle miles traveled estimate is for the city of Holland. That's a piece of the calculation. We also obviously have the average fuel efficiency of the vehicles, which again is state data telling us what the vehicle fleet is made up of, and et cetera. So we're kind of getting information out of a black box and kind of trusting it at its value. The most recent way that MDOT has proposed to give us that data is actually a City of Holland specific VMT calculation they've developed for cities since 2019. However, that number is about almost 40% higher than it was for the last few times we've calculated the transportation impact for City of Holland. So that would be a big jump in that number. And if we were to adopt their new methodology into our methodology of calculation, that would mean the piece of the pie for transportation would move from about 12% up to about 17%, or roughly where it was when the CEP was originally done. That's a bit of a coincidence because when it was done in 2010, it was an interpolation of Ottawa County's VMT number, which was the best that Garforth had at that time. It just so happens the number, now that we have more specific means of calculating it, just happens to be almost exactly the same. So that would be a different discussion for how we would reflect that calculation in the years that we've done since, whether we would update those or put a note just on this current year. But just so you're all aware, that's a potentially impact of about 1 metric ton per capita, that jump in the number, what that actually means for the bottom line. So we would not be at, what was it, Dave? We would not be at 16, but more like 17, I think, is what.
Yeah,
for this
and then if you
current
look
year.
at the end number, then, you know, what it impacts, and this is something just to park for this later discussion, I think when you revisit this, want to make sure you had it, is that our current target for the transportation lever includes a target that's associated with the transition to EVs, to electric vehicles, but it also includes a 5% reduction in vehicle miles traveled with reference to the 2018 number, which was the most recent fully confirmed and finalized number. As Andrew's pointing out, for the 2020 number, that number is going to be about 38% higher than the 2018 number, just purely based upon the methodology that Michigan Department of Transportation is using to determine Holland's vehicle miles traveled. So not because there's that many more vehicles on the road, that many more vehicles traveling, but because of the methodology that MDOT is using. So if we were to look at still holding to the 2018 number for the 2030 reduction, we're really going to be looking at about a 43% reduction against the number that they recently came up with because of the massive increase that black box is giving us at this point. So again, this could be part of the larger discussion when we revisit this item, but want to make sure that you at least had this information, could ask Andrew any questions about it before we go back to that.
The new data is 2019 or is it 2020?
It's officially 2019.
Okay.
But theoretically, they can do it on an as-needed basis going forward. 'cause
Yeah, but
previously
it's like the last normal year.
yeah,
Okay.
true.
So instead of transportation being 12% of our pie, it's 17% of our pie?
If we use this method for calculating VMT, that's correct.
Is there another way to calculate it?
There are lots of ways to estimate it from what I've heard from talking to multiple people at MDOT. It's kind of, they're used for different things. So we used one of their other methods in the past, but their recommendation based on the people I talked to this time around was you should, if you want city specific, this is the number you want to use. But there is always different ways of doing it.
Okay.
So that's okay, as long as we have a baseline. It's not,
Yeah. And
it's an asterisk year.
and just overly simplified, everything else being the same, our current report would then reflect we're getting to 12 and a half by 2030,
Yeah,
not 11 and a
I
half,
think it's about 12 and a quarter.
12 and a quarter instead of 11 and a half or 11.4, whatever it was.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you follow that, you're taking it off from the new number as opposed to off the 2018 number, then, and Jeff, you point out it's 2019 really, but if you use that as the number, the 2020 calculation as the basis, and trying to take a 5% off that, we'll end up at 12 and a quarter by 2030, would be the number for the total bottom line.
And this is maybe an unfair question, but to the best of your guys' knowledge, considering the black box nature of the data, what are the chances, from your perspective,
It changes again.
of it changing again?
Probably good,
Probably good.
Yep.
unfortunately.
And there's no way
Can
to,
we get some
there's
high
no
school
way
kids to like
check
stand on all the sides of the roads and with like clickers?
Right,
And
there's no way to check it.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's an extrapolation on their end of actual traffic counts. So there
Yeah.
are traffic counts involved, but it's a statistical model still.
Well, and we can dig into it down the road, but my sense would be we eat our medicine now and use the worst numbers now, such that if we are using the same methodology in 10 years, you're not paying for it then by like, might as well just eat it now instead of like doing all this work and then the number didn't move at all because we took the old methodology as the baseline, right? Like, I mean,
If the group wants to do that, what we would do is make an edit to the document that says, instead of referencing the 5% vehicle mile traveled reduction from 2018, it would be from 2020's calculation.
Yeah.
Right.
that just seems more fair moving forward, even though we're acknowledging they might change how the math gets done either way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll draft it up accordingly to that, but we're going to revisit the entirety of that draft report here. I think, like you said, you want to change the order up, but I just want to make sure you had that. And if Andrew had to leave or something, we didn't miss out on that.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, that's
So do
good.
they do these counts every year then?
Well, with this new approach, they would be able to do it as needed, so we could do
As
it
needed,
every year that
okay.
we wanted to do the calculation. Because actually, the 2015 calculation actually used 2015 VMT data, so it was previously a very slow update.
So we could
So-
have it every year if we request it?
That's what it sounds like.
Okay, thank you.
So Dave, would there be a modest impact to the 11.5?
Right, we go to 12 and a quarter
12 and a quarter, gotcha.
is what I've calculated. Again, very roughly, we'll have to take a look at that down to the, when Andrew finalizes his 2020 number, you know, which is pretty close at this point. We think it's going to be in that range of 12 and a quarter, somewhere in there.
And would it have an impact on target number 3 in the transportation category as well?
I'd have to look at that one. I don't know,
That's
Ted,
the-
if you can click on the.
It says achieve 30% reduction in carbon emissions from the transportation sector.
Seems like that would have
Yeah, I mean, the idea here again is versus 2020, I think it would probably be fair still, the 30%, because you're trying to do 5% and a 25% change in the
Right.
amount of EVs.
Right.
So I think you're still okay as far as that cumulative number against the 2020, but it's gonna be against the 2020 number.
A
as
higher
opposed to-
number.
Yeah,
Right.
which is like.
Yeah, your base is higher.
Yeah.
And not higher because of a change, but higher because of a calculation.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But maybe it's encouraging that as more cities are probably wanting this number, that maybe they've gotten better at their way
Yeah.
of calculating it, and that their model maybe won't change a lot going forward. But it obviously was a fairly abrupt and big change, and so we wanted to make sure you were aware of it. So,
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you, Andrew.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah. That's great.
but with that, we could come back to that and go to 5 for Joe if you'd like, and make sure we capture that before Boyd has to go as well.
Yeah, I'd like us all to hear from Joe if
Yep.
if we have a time constraint with Boyd, and then we can circle back,
Great.
assuming Scott comes, but otherwise we will not circle back and we'll just
Yeah,
keep
well,
moving
We'll
forward.
invite Joe up
Straight
wherever
line.
you want to be, Joe. You can grab the other table
Sorry
if you
for
want.
the
or
lack
up
of
there.
notice. I didn't think we'd have a quorum problem, so.
You're
first
okay.
time.
Yeah,
And-
PJ bailed this morning and it happens.
Yeah, and so, again, this was something that the group wanted to do after Joe did the 4 comparative cities, is to come back and point the lens at us, look retrospectively at what Holland is doing, and kind of take that same format. So Ted, if you want to pull up the CP internal review there, that one, yep. And maybe increase the size of that a little bit. That's been in your packet. Joe, I'll turn it over to you to kind of take us through what you've done there.
All right, I'll try to be quick, and if not, I can put it in a podcast for Brian to listen to.
That's great. I appreciate that.
We good now?
Oh, you
Yeah.
didn't get that good joke on camera.
Okay, so I'll just go through this quick and try to pull some of the key highlights from each of these sections. You'll see, if you had a chance to read it, this is just a 2-page report that mirrored the same structure that we looked at for those 4 focus cities about 3 months ago. So starting off the top with the indicators that make Holland unique, these come out of that matrix that had the green, yellow, and red indicators across the triple bottom line. Of course, we looked for cities that were as close as possible to the city of Holland, but there's a few characteristics that were really hard to match. 2 of those that are very obvious to everyone in this room, but worth calling out again, are first, the high proportion of commercial and industrial compared to residential in the city of Holland. So we know that any efforts there will have more impact in Holland proportionally compared to other cities in the focus group. And then the other one, of course, is the DPW. Having a small municipal utility with such a close relationship to the city is unique among the focus cities. 3 of those were investor-owned utilities servicing those cities, so large companies with more stakeholders in a larger geographic area. Lansing does have a municipal utility, but it's a different relationship and a little bit looser connection to the city there. So of course, there's unique opportunities and constraints that come with that relationship. Jumping to the next section, so goals and guiding documentation. This just called out those goals for each of the 4 cities. We're well aware of the City of Holland's goal. I think the thing that's worth noting here and might not be as prominent as it should be is the 2011 date there. If we look at the other focus cities and a lot of cities that were in that matrix, many of these communities that have these new headline goals are in the past 2 to 3 years. So they're very fresh goals. They have not had a lot of time for action or implementation. It's just kind of a target that they've set thus far. For the City of Holland, we've been at this for close to a decade or a little over a decade now. So there was that initial action plan, and there's been implementation and a track record of progress since then that we have that a lot of other cities really don't have. Jumping into the council and the mayoral approach, this is really looking at how leadership has really tackled this challenge and gone after these opportunities. Again, we see with these 4 focus cities, the mayor or the council that really launched these goals forward either came into office or into the position just with having already promised or made a commitment in their minds that they're going to set a goal. It wasn't that they did some long research process or a strategic session like this. They really came in and set this target and then tasked their committees or their staff to figure out afterwards. Whereas we know here, the people in this room, this is more of a data-driven and a pragmatic approach that we're seeing taking place. And then the second piece that I tried to highlight is the triple bottom line is something that's very prominent in the City of Holland's verbiage and vocabulary around this process. A lot of cities are focused on the environmental side and things like climate, whereas here we see and we hear from the BPW and a lot of its terminology, there's a focus on the business community and having a competitive environment for the business community here that attracts those businesses and supports an economically viable place. And also affordability and reliability for residents too. So that full triple bottom line approach and balancing all of the needs across those different pieces. Staff, we don't have to spend too much time on, but we really have a similar structure to other communities. The move to add a full-time sustainability manager position reflects what we see in each of the focus communities. We're unique and lucky with the people in this room with the BPW to have staff like Andrew and Ann and Barry and Emily Damaska that kind of serve as an extended group that's working together with Dan and other members of the community to support sustainability efforts from a staff level. And then similar relationships we're seeing with folks like Hope College and schools and the library and the ODC. The Holland does a great job of leveraging those opportunities and partnerships in the community as an extension of the staff. The next page looks at budget and funding, and this is a place that I tried to look into how these activities are funded internally with the city, but also how they're providing opportunities for residents and businesses to get involved as well from an economic standpoint. What we're seeing with these communities that have 2 or 3 year old goals and are really just kind of getting started in the process is that they're heavily grant dependent, so they're looking for grants from the state or the federal level to fund just the planning process or kind of these one-off programs. We've seen with the city that we're capable of securing those and doing similar things as well. If I recall correctly, like the recent recycling project, that was a grant-funded project, but then there's also things like the Holland Energy Fund, and the city's exploring things like the EV purchasing policy as well. So kind of a wider range of tools being flexed in the City of Holland than we see in other communities. And then flipping it and looking, like I said, at the residents and the businesses and the opportunities provided there. The City of Holland might not have like a standout program that's recognized nationally for its unique opportunities that it provides, but the number of programs that we offer and the different things that people can get involved with, whether it's incentives or rebates or home energy retrofit, we have a wide swath of opportunities for people to get plugged in and start learning and joining us in this community-wide goal. Of course, there's always opportunities to create better awareness and education. That's something that you guys are well aware of and have discussed. But the building blocks and the efforts to get the community involved here are on par or exceeding the focus cities. So wrapping up with the progress section, and this is really just looking at, how are these cities moving the needle? If you'll recall, and I'm really beating the same drum here, but the 2 to 3 year old goal cities have set those aspirational goals, and whether it's COVID or just struggling to get started, have not really made a lot of progress thus far on actually reducing carbon or meeting their other metrics. But as we look at the City of Holland and having been at this for a decade, and with the numbers that we're talking about at the open house, there was the graphs, and Andrew just mentioned the moving up on the goal by nearly 20 years. That's, at least in the cities that were comparable to the City of Holland, unheard of for a city to set a goal, make progress towards it, and then make that progress faster than they initially anticipated. So I think great building blocks and a good start here if we look at the city and kind of flip this lens back on us from the benchmarking perspective. Obviously, you want to keep the momentum going, but something to be proud of to start here. So that's the quick run through. Hopefully you get a chance to read through the rest of it if you have time. The only other thing that I'll call out before I turn it back over, if you have any questions before Boyd has to go, is I saw that this, I don't know if we can pull it up, but there was just an Excel document that's attached here that I tried to just benchmark events that happened over a timeline and just keep track for my own purposes of things that were happening. And it's like just a good testament to the momentum that we've built and the body of work that's been done by people in this room and our community towards this goal. So I don't know if we can include that in the final report or not, but just something that might be helpful to see how we've continued to work and add new things and hit milestones over time on this process.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. I think that should be included in our final report, as it gives a great background of what has been achieved over the last, all the way back to '08, actually, so.
Go
No,
ahead, Nikki.
thanks, Joe.
Question. And obviously, and all along, Holland has shown itself to be first out of the gate. It was unclear to me how much, the report recommended that cities leverage organizations like ICLEI and the Council for Mayors, the Global, whatever, Conference for Mayors. And that was in our resource document. Have we, and I know we belong to one or more of those organizations. Have we used those, the information in there?
Yeah, matter of fact,
They said to
Andrew was
copy.
just talking about some of the information relative to the work that he does. There's information, I think, out of, is it ICLEI that provides some of the vehicle performance data?
Okay.
So, we do use some of those data sets, and obviously, that gives us comparable communities to check in on as well in terms of programs, that to the extent that they actually show their programs on their reporting tool.
Do they have any further recommendations that we don't already do? Maybe they're taking recommendations from us. don't
Yeah, I
know.
hope they're probably taking it from us, because we're the ones showing progress, so.
Yeah.
But, no, I mean, I think, again, we that's one of the things that Joe tried to do when you look at that matrix, and I know that's at the bottom of the community comparison report,
Mhm.
and then you all had access to be able to expand those matrices, not this one here, but the one where you had the people
Yep.
and the people, the prosperity, and then the planet one, associated with, all those different demographics, but then also on the programs, the various levers are there. And that was part of that exploration to see if any of those cities are doing something that's different from what we're doing in terms of initiatives. We want to continue to learn from those cities that are on that matrix and see what we can implement here.
Joe, yeah, in your final summary, is there, of the four you compared to, is there one that you'd highlight that the city could form tighter ties with to move forward, benchmarking and collaboration of any sort? Or, no, are we out too far? And
No, I think we can always learn from peers. I think it's hard to pick any just one. I mean, each one has kind of a strong suit in an area that they're investing most of their time in. I mentioned from the municipal utility perspective, Lansing's the only one in there that has a somewhat program and community engagement side. Grand Rapids is being, I think, the largest population of the four, has more staff and has done more with community involvement and community engagement. So that might be a place to look as we roll out some of the strategies to see, is there opportunities to learn from or mirror or partner with some of the programs that they've done there with their business community and residential community.
could you almost, it sounds like you could almost have a bit of a grid by a couple of themes, cities, and then which ones might have certain strengths that we'd benefit from partnering
Sure.
up on? Just some guidance on, hey, this is an area or a channel that we might want to form tighter ties with in the future, just to leave that thought behind.
Yeah, that would be great, and then I can circle that back even to, and Andrew knows more about how ICLEI works than I do, but a lot of, like the ICLEI and USDN tools have, there's like subgroups you can get involved with, so if there's a section or a focus area that you're interested in, there are existing, there's existing infrastructure for those peer groups and people that are either interested in or already leading in those spaces that you can get plugged into, even beyond the focus groups. They're focus cities in this study, yeah.
That's great.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, and I put that under the, in terms of the proposed agenda for today, it fits under a section called discussion regarding the approach to the public-facing report. And I know Boyd may have to scoot on this, but one of the reasons, and an important thing to get across today, because this would be our work between now and the next potential meeting, which would probably be the 20th of September, was that I think in discussion, at least with the leadership team of Brian or Travis, and maybe with the broader group, I can't remember how that went, but we discussed leveraging the strategic development team webpage on the city's website to be the point where this information would come out to the public, essentially. Instead of drafting a 100+ page report,
Right.
that we would have essentially we'd call it three main groups of information. One would be the background discussion and history, which was early given to this group and contained a lot of what got us to this point. the next section that was gonna be in that report, and which would be kind of a separate link on this webpage, would be the community comparison tool. So you'd be able to see Joe's work in written form, but also you could click on his YouTube links to be able to see his video presentation of those as well. And we can maybe adjust some of those final recommendations based upon what we just heard here in terms of some suggestions on how to link to these different communities. And then the third grouping of information would be the actual document that's listed under item 4 and was presented to the public open house last time, and that is the 5 levers, the goals, the targets, and strategies, and potential action steps under those. That would be essentially the SDT's presentation to City Council on the recommendations, along with any additional narrative that would support the overall governance recommendations and other commentary that was at the bottom of that document. So that is what we are going to be working towards, unless this group wants us to pivot and do something different. But that's what we wanted to check with you under item 5 today, especially as it relates to Joe's work. But then remember, 3 groupings under the SDT page, and that those 3 groupings would be the background document,
The benchmarking.
Joe's community comparison, and then the document that represents the strategic development team's recommendations on the goals, targets, and strategies and potential action steps.
Good.
I think that sounds appropriate.
Yeah.
Dave, yeah, that's great.
So our hope would be that, again, we can circle back to item 4 if you want, just have some commentary about it. I know we're talking about the work on the vehicle miles traveled. We'll update that target. But otherwise, we'll just work between now and the 20th of September to try to clean up those documents and have those linkable from a, and we'll just identify draft for those at this point, just so the public doesn't assume that your work is finalized. But we'll have something that specifies draft, but that shows the links there, so that on the 20th we can come back and just kind of click through those and make sure that you're
Yeah.
comfortable with that, if you're okay with that being the direction that we
Yeah.
would head as staff.
Are you assuming you'll get that draft to us before we meet so we can be prepared to have our discussion at the meeting
Yeah,
on the 20th?
I think as soon as we're ready to put the links on there and the webpage, we'll alert you to that.
Yeah.
And even if all 3 aren't available, as they come up there,
Okay.
we'll start populating them and just tune you into that. I think there's a chance that the public may see it partway through because it's on a webpage that's active.
Yep.
But as long as we indicate draft on there, I think we're probably fine with that. And so we can continue
Yeah.
to let you know as those things are getting out there that you can take a look at that.
Good, yeah, because that way, that would give us the opportunity to all read it and have I think, a more robust conversation on the 20th.
Yeah.
So, good.
Yeah.
And all of that builds to then, hopefully on the 20th, if you get through that and say, yeah, we're comfortable, or know what has to be tweaked, I think Keith and I, would stand ready to support both Brian and Travis in the preparation of a report that would go to council then, assuming that on the 20th, and again, maybe it's a big assumption, but assuming that you're comfortable at least with the recommendations in the 5 levers with regard to the goals and strategies and targets, that would be a foundation for preparing a PowerPoint presentation that ultimately would be delivered to City Council. Keith and I would, work with the council in establishing a time frame to hear it, probably maybe in study session first and then for adoption. That's something I haven't talked to Keith in that level of specificity, but that may be, potentially within the October timeframe that sort of report out could happen.
Good,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. I think that is a good game plan in my mind.
Yep.
Are we allowed to decide that without a quorum here? I mean,
Not officially, but I can get some head nods or whatever if
Yeah.
you're comfortable with that. We'll work.
well, we're not
towards
really
it.
Want
voting on
heads this way
anything.
or
Yeah,
this
Yeah,
way.
right,
we're-
exactly.
We're not voting on anything, and everything you're talking
Yeah.
about is like draft mode, so it
Correct.
all can be changed.
And it's
so.
all on
Yeah.
computer, so
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
easy.
It's
Yeah.
directional.
Directionally.
Yes, right.
And I know in one of the strategies will involve accountability. I know council members Corbin would ask about that too, just that there's some plan going forward. We have a number of people involved, Dan and Andrew now.
Yeah, I think right now what the document shows for the proposed, I think, Ted, if you pull up the first item under number 4, and you go down to the bottom, all the way to the bottom, to the narrative at the bottom. All the way down to number 4 of that, I think, right there. City Council should receive, sorry, I'm reading on a side view here.
Should receive an annual report on the progress being made at the lever level.
Yeah, and that's how it's being written right now, if there's a tweak that needs to be made to that, but that's the idea behind it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that
That's the general.
captures what we're, and just to riff off of Boyd's gratitude to Laura around her, accountability and all the level of detail that we're saying here, like there should be an annual report based on the lever. And then if there's like more specificity underneath that, that gets decided. I mean, we could either write that in at this recommendation level, or that might just be something that comes out of doing the report every year and council being like, well, what about this or what about that?
Yeah, I think the other thing to maybe keep in mind is that, the matrix type thing that Joe had up, it showed, all the accomplishments. Those you could group into the different levers as well. I mean, you could show, here's the progress that's being made under that lever. In terms of empirical data coming out, in terms of the results of the carbon number, right now that has been a biannual calculation. So Andrew did 2018, he's doing 2020. Right now the plan would be, to do 2022. So, if council wants something more done than that, that would be something we'd need to know, but otherwise on the year, other than the calculation, you would still have a presentation of the work being done, where are the different tactical action teams at in terms of exploration, what kind of initiatives have been recommended or starting to be put in place. So it'd be more of a, report out on the actual activity of those areas, and then the actual calculation of the
Every other year.
other result would be every other year. That's what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
If that needs to change, then that's something, I think that level of specificity we need to hear about.
Yeah.
But otherwise that's the methodology that we've been employing.
That's a good point of clarification, and I think one that we can all like think on over the next number of weeks is a report on the activities every year to council, and then a report on the actual numbers every other year. Good enough, or do we think the carbon calculation should be also calculated every year alongside the activities report? And maybe, Dave, as a mini homework project for us to have in our heads is like, how much time and or cost does that take to run those calculations? Because we don't want to just, arbitrarily be like, yeah, run the numbers every year, and it's like half of Andrew's job for 3 months.
Correct, and I think that was instructive, Joe's comments about staff and other communities that are spending all their time on
the reporting,
calculating metrics, as opposed to spending their time on working on issues.
I'm doing something.
Right, and so I think that is very important information to come back. We have a lot of the data, but we have to rely upon other sources for some. Andrew pointed out MDOT.
Yeah.
We also have to rely upon SEMCO for the gas data, and to be able to receive that in a way that allows us to match that up against the different segments, residential, industrial, commercial. And then we have to do our own parsing of our own data to city versus non-city. So there are some steps that we have to take in order to do that. But, that's certainly something that we can get back to this group unless Andrew has it on the cuff at this point, but
Better each time.
yeah, right. That's true. That's true until they throw you curveballs, like they did this year. But yeah.
Well, my sense would be at the minimum we would present to council like, hey, if you want the carbon calculations every year, the cost for us internally with labor and actual outside costs to do that is.
Right.
Whatever, put a number on it, right? 30 grand or 50 grand. And then council can be like, how much do we care about seeing the number every year versus seeing it every other year? Cause we're going to have to budget for it. I think that if we can get that level of granularity, high level granularity, I think that would be fair, because I think the sort of simplicity from this side of the, whatever this is, bench, you know, it's sort of easy and flippant to be like, yeah, let's run the numbers every year, right? But like, what does that actually mean for real people? And to Joe's point around all these other cities, like spending all their time just running the numbers, it doesn't really work. So that would be good data for council to have, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some specific, you know, every year when we report on the progress of various programs, you know, we can give you data on some of those programs. I know some of the work about, and we talked about, you know, we have an obligation under our electric vehicle and maintenance, it's an alternative fuel, I should say, vehicle and maintenance equipment policy that the board and the city adopted to give an annual report. We've got home energy retrofit program gives out regular reporting. If, you know, depending upon what time we get to the creation of electrification incentive program, we'll have report out on the program's performance.
Yeah.
But, you know, the calculation is the result of that, all of that work. It's not necessarily the means, it's the ends, you know, that are taking place. And so, you know, the ends calculation is really the one that's happening every 2 years. But I would imagine that as we report out on an annual basis on the programs, there will be program metrics, you know, that will be associated with that report out.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, Nikki.
Well, I was going to say, along with that, those hard numbers and metrics, there's another part of some of these strategies, like with the building energy consumption. A strategy says research, create and implement a proposed program. That won't necessarily have hard numbers or a graph. We'll just need a verbal report on, yes, something's happening. We're talking with Hope or the Ford Mobility Program or something. That would be
Yeah, we're
easier just to kind of, because
Yeah.
the danger is that this just in 2 years ago, oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's not a danger, because I think when you look at the fact that this all gets handed to a steering committee, and then that steering committee makes active work at it as it has for the last 10, 12 years.
So they'll just need a sentence or something.
Yeah, I mean, matter of fact, we've already been talking about when your group is reporting out on the recommendations for the next time, the steering committee that's taken the 2018 strategic development team's initiatives and has been working on those will be reporting out whether it's the same time, whether it's shortly thereafter, same meeting, different agenda item, whatever, but it's about the time now. It's 2021, so it's the end of that group's work, and they need to be reporting out too. So, you know, the fact is that we have public meetings that are the steering committee meetings that happen all the time, you know, actually it's quarterly at this point, but the steering committees are meeting at least quarterly, and the action teams are meeting more regularly than that to actually do the work of pursuing these strategies. So the great thing about, I think, our plan in Holland is that it doesn't sit on the shelf. It's one where, you know, once the SDT's work is done, handed to City Council, they bless it, it goes to a steering committee to actually say, okay, here's what you got to work on. And then we figure out how to get the work done. Yeah. And that's the thing that I think we'd be making the report out on an annual basis. It's like, where are we at? You know, what's going on? And so that's our thought on that.
Yeah, that could be cool if those ended up in the same meeting. Not that it needs to, but it would be nice to, you know, in this governance recommendations and considerations section, you know, if I'm giving the presentation, I'm saying another thing we're recommending is that instead of every 3 years, council, you hear about this, you should hear an update about this every year, and this is what one of those updates look like.
Right.
Here's Dave with your 2018 report, but now you're going to see this every year. I mean, that'd be a nice handoff, and then they could like experience it live, like.
Right.
So, anyways, not that it needs to happen, but that could be good.
Yeah.
Cool. Good. Well, I literally don't know what we're allowed to or not allowed to do
we can
at
have
this
some,
point without the
You
quorum.
can't take any action, but you are in a good position as the chair if there's no other items, once there's no other items, to declare the meeting as adjourned. Okay. And I think you just have to understand is that there really isn't any action that you can take at this point without a quorum. And I don't think there's anything on the agenda that really calls for action at this point. So if there is other dialogue that you want to have around item 4, and again, if you call up item 4, Ted, one of the things we wanted to get to you tonight is that you've got the draft. It was asked before the meeting, let me just bring up for everybody here, public engagement and feedback has taken many forms, right? And so one is the fact that these are public meetings and we've gotten a lot of people coming in at times and submitting written comments or making verbal comments. We also have had now, this last meeting was dedicated to an open house that allowed people to come in and give comments against the work here. We've had a series of listening tours going on with major businesses in town. We are in the process of summarizing the results of those. I would say there were some themes that came through, and so our group, Ted's group particularly, Amy Yost, is taking those that you sat in on, those particular conversations. You did receive the notes from those and were offered an opportunity to give comment on those. Some of you were able to do that. Others said, no, it represents kind of what my understanding was of those meetings as well. And then the last piece of feedback is the survey at the Frost Institute is working to create and implement. That was given a green light when we got the series of strategies and targets and goals that were ready for the open house. And so our staff has been working with the Frost group in order to put that survey together. We have a draft that needs to be tweaked a little bit. There were some additional questions we felt were needed to be asked based upon the recommended strategies that were here. We don't think it really captured all those, but it will soon. And so, but the timing of that in order to conduct it and get the feedback and then to synthesize it and get a report back is probably going to be more instructive to the groups that are implementing this as opposed to your work and saying that, yes, it's the right strategy to recommend or not. And that's because that feedback probably will not get to us until October, given their timeline that they're on and the ability to take that and process it and get it back to us. So nevertheless, I think it's valuable. We're going to ask a lot of questions about the particular strategies so we have an idea of where the general public is right now on their attitude towards and appetite for, some of the particular initiatives. And I think that'll be instructive to the groups that start doing that work. So that is all the public feedback. Tonight, we put in the packet the comments under each of the various areas. Matter of fact, Ted, if you maybe go back to the agenda and click on the second one there, you can scroll down. So what we basically did is there were different charts around the room, but also there were, if you go down into the metric or into the levers, again, we kept the goals and targets there and asked people to provide sticky notes to that. And so we try to capture that in this as well, just to make sure that we check back with you and see if there's anything new or different that you feel needs to happen to the targets, to the goals, to the strategies one last time. Again, the one that we want to be able to do is really under the transportation, and that just is based upon Andrew's feedback. But if you felt that there was something here that you needed to explore, we want to make sure that you had this in your packet today. One of the things that people have asked about is why this number, not that number. Obviously, the benefit of this group, having had all those meetings, is you understood the foundation for a lot of those targets when we had those discussions. I will tell you that there's another piece of information that's been added to the resource document. There's a group, I think it was an independent firm, Ted helped me out, I don't know if you remember, there was a group that had done an assessment of the energy waste reduction savings in the state of Michigan. And that group, their report has been added to the resources document. So if you want to avail yourself of that, you can see that. I will tell you that the numbers that they identified as being potentially achievable line up pretty well. Matter of fact, if you scroll down, Ted, you can see that there is a dates next. That's the one. Yeah, you were in the right document. If you scroll down, you'll see, I think, an August number next to one of the ones on the right. Yeah. One more page down. That one right there. So if you click on that report right there, this was done internally in the state of Michigan, I think, by their, might have been a consultant helping with that. Do you have to do that? Can you just click on the, go back to the other tab? Oh, looks like it doesn't. You have to sign in? Do you know how to sign in? Oh, you have to, on your own you had to. Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know how that's gonna work for us. But I just ask you to take a look at it at some point. It actually supports the cumulative numbers that we had been looking at for our targets in our energy waste reduction program with our more aggressive annual numbers. So it's an interesting report in total if you get a chance to take a look at it. Also gives some instruction towards the type of incentives that may have the most potential within those programs as well. So not only is it instructive, I think, to our teams that are working on implementing our energy waste reduction programs, but also instructive, I think, to this group in terms of confirming the targets that you had placed on the different levers, especially the building energy consumption numbers.
Guidehouse.
You know what it is? Guidehouse is the consulting firm? Okay. And there's probably a different link on the state of Michigan's website that you otherwise could, I don't know if that's, well, that's actually where you went. It's probably through that resources document link.
I have it, but I downloaded it and saved it, so.
Okay. Yeah. So that is, again, for your feedback. But I don't know, Mr. Chair, if there's anything else that you want to look at in terms of the sticky notes or any sort of feedback from the open house at this point.
Unless someone wanted to lift something up in particular from the sticky notes, which are now bullet points in this document, they're welcome to. I didn't, nothing jumped out to me that I don't feel like we've covered exactly. Doesn't sound like anybody else, anything jumped out to anybody in particular. No, that's good. I think we got a good game plan. You've mentioned September 20th.
Correct.
I'm assuming the 13th doesn't work because of some sort of
So I'll explain
BPW
that.
board
Right.
meeting.
Yeah,
That's
so
all good.
Labor Day is the 6th, so our BPW board meeting then has to be the 13th.
Okay.
And so that conflicts, and so we would have the 20th. And maybe that's the last time this group has to meet. Maybe there's a time in October. Otherwise, I think I'd leave that up. Obviously, that's this group's decision. But, you know, if we can get through things on the 20th, show you where the documents are located on the webpage, be finalized, then it'd be a matter of supporting, you know, Travis and Brian with, preparation for a presentation sometime in October.
Good.
Okay.
Good. All right. Does that sound like a plan?
Sounds like a
It
plan.
All right.
does.
Great. Well, then we'll put the 20th down, and we'll be thinking about how often we want to recommend the different levels of reports to be included in the fourth part. Take some time to reread this stuff so that we can come to the 20th ready to rock and roll.
Ready to
Something
try
good.
and wrap it up. That'd be good.
Wrap it up. Okay, great. Well, yeah, meeting adjourned, I think.
Great.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.